and it's at 2.2. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's not many players out there that you can say, okay, look at his slash line, look at his offensive numbers, and you look on reference and you see he's a 2-WAR player not even halfway through the season yet. So
you are Locked On Rays, your daily Tampa Bay Rays podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
welcome into Locked On Rays, your daily podcast covering everything Tampa Bay Rays, from game analysis to player interviews. We've got you covered with all the latest news and insights. On today's program, it will be myself, Kevin Weiss, and Jonathan Shields, who is the host of the Locked On Rays postcast program. Ulysses will not be joining us today, but we'll be back in the saddle later on this week. We had some scheduling conflicts that we're trying to work out and administer. But Jonathan, we have a lot to discuss on today's program. A lot of Rays news, some good, some bad, some who knows at this point. But let's first start out with the Rays and the hot streak that they're on. I can't even recall or remember how many wins and how many games they're on right now. You've been tracking every single game, pretty much every single inning, and now they go on the road and will face the Royals in Kansas City. But it really is quite the dichotomy that the Rays are dealing with presently, whereas, 2 months ago, we were down in the dumps, and now you look at the AL East standings, and the Rays are 43-35 and just 2 games back of the Yankees. So every game, seemingly, every series, seemingly, they're pulling at my heartstrings and giving me belief and hope that, hey, they might not just make the playoffs and sneak in as a wild card. They could legitimately, theoretically, take the division, depending on how it all shakes out.
Yeah, I think I saw that this is the best month they've had since they started 13-0 back in that crazy season where they won 99 games. But I agree with you. When you look at the American League, who's the best team in the AL? People would say the Tigers. Well, the Rays really dominated 2 out of the 3 games against Detroit. Other people would say the Yankees. I have some major questions about the Yankees. I don't love their lineup depth. I don't love besides Max Fried. I don't love a lot of their starting pitchers, especially with Garrett Cole out for the year. I still think the most talented team in the American League is Texas, the Texas Rangers. And, obviously they're well behind the Astros, who are also in that same conversation. So, I think the Rays have a unique blend of they could have a top 10 staff, a top 10 lineup, and a top 10 bullpen. And I don't think many of those other teams can say that. So, I think the Rays can beat you in so many different ways. In those last 30 games, they lead the majors in home runs and they lead the majors in steals. They're just so versatile. And this is honestly a unique team that we haven't seen. And, that is pretty rare nowadays with MLB.
Yeah, we're seeing it in all 3 phases: offense, defense, pitching. Not everybody has stepped up like we've wanted, and there's been some guys that have struggled. But overall, as a group and the way they've played together has really been something special. And with that, I want to get your take, Jonathan, because you're doing a show after every game. If there's one player during this run that has impressed you most and opened your eyes the most, who has that been?
So the easy answer is Jonathan Aranda, because he's just been so fantastic. And he's literally just a professional hitter. He hits everything, it seems like, at least 280 or above. But I'll go away from the obvious hitter. I'm going to go with Taylor Walls. I've been on record saying if Taylor Walls could be a 220 hitter, he's going to be not only on this roster, but on a roster for the next decade. Oh, yeah. That's how good he is defensively. And he's almost at like this 15, 16 game stretch now where he's hitting right at or over 300. And he has stopped putting the ball in the air. It's all live drives, ground balls, just sharply hit stuff. I mean, if you're watching the game, Taylor Walls, if he was just a little bit bigger, he hits one to the track. It seems like once or twice a game. And that's because he's doing, more line drives, getting the ball in the more. It's almost like the Chandler Simpson model when Simpson was like, you don't want Simpson to, get under one. And really, you want him to, line drives and ground balls. And Taylor Walls is kind of taking that model. So he's came up with a lot of big hits. I think about the triple he hit against Baltimore to keep kind of that the comeback going. But, I think he's just been fantastic lately. And he's provided some much needed lineup depth. It came out that the 7th, 8th, 9th hitters in the Rays lineup have like 39 RBIs last month, and it's the most out of any 7, 8, 9 trio in the MLB. And Taylor Walls is a big part of that.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy because I honestly wouldn't be able to sit here and say that on June 24th that Taylor Walls would have a batting average above 220 and that he would have an OPS at 609. Would we love to see the numbers a little bit higher? Sure, but the run he's on, we can't argue with it. And then what he adds defensively, I looked up his baseball reference WAR, and it's at 2.2. So, I mean, there's not many players out there that you can say, okay, look at his slash line, look at his offensive numbers, and you look on reference and you see he's a 2 WAR player, not even halfway through the season yet. So it is something to behold. Hopefully he's able to keep it up. It remains to be seen. Jonathan, you did mention a player that I'm very excited in seeing in a Rays uniform again. That is one Chandler Simpson, who was called up. He was sent down several weeks back to AAA to work on some items. And I guess there was just, there at the time, the Rays didn't feel like there was a roster spot, but he totally tore it up in AAA. I look at the numbers, and he was hitting 366 with a 416 on base and a 465 slug, stole 11 bases, and struck out only 8 times in 71 at-bats. And my line of thinking is you put up those types of numbers, you can't hold a guy down like that, especially when you might have a player like Cameron Meisner struggling. So I am really curious to see if Simpson will be up for good. Like if this is going to be the last shuffle between Durham or AAA back and forth. Hopefully he's figured out what the Rays want him to work on, and he can just dominate in the areas that we know he can dominate in making contact and stealing a bunch of bags, and hopefully the defense is shored up a little bit.
Yeah, that's the main reason why they sent him down. It's because they wanted the defense better. I guess they wanted him to hit lefties better.
Yeah.
But with the way the Rays play, I mean, even though he's playing tonight against the lefty, he's not going to be playing against a ton of lefties. But, it's very interesting because, Mangum's in the lineup tonight also, but they're starting Simpson at center. So I think that's pretty kind of a big transition here. But, a lot of things you said are 100% right. Like he's too good for AAA. And it's not even one of those things where he's like an AAA player. Some people say that where they're too good for AAA, but, don't perform in the big leagues. He came up and performed in the big leagues. He's top 10 in the major leagues in steals, and he's only played X amount of games. So, he's a guy that can make an impact in so many different ways. But we did see the defense be not good at times. We also saw him make, at least off the top of my head, 2 spectacular plays in the outfield. But you just can't keep a guy that electric in AAA, especially when Cameron Meisner was hitting a $150 over his last almost 60 games.
Right.
So, the change was necessary. I'm surprised they made it yesterday, but, I'm happy that this front office was being, proactive and not waiting. And I think a lot of it had to do with, Richie Palacios getting kind of re-aggravating that knee injury. So now they're like, look, we really can't sit in our hands anymore. We got to make a proactive move. And, they did. And I think, he's just going to pick up right where he left off.
So were you kind of under the line of thinking of they let the string out too long on Meisner, that they should have sent him down earlier or made some other decision with him?
I don't know, because at the time he was playing really good defense.
Yeah.
And this was before his stretch where he hit a $150 and, the 60 games. It was right kind of like the beginning to, 20 games into that. So, I don't know, because Cam Meisner did a lot of really good things, especially in the first month of the season. So, but, he got a massive opportunity. He was playing basically every day. But it got to the point where I was saying, look, it's at the point where, they've kind of platoon Walls and Cabby every other day. I said they got to start doing that with Morel and Meisner. You're holding back this roster spot from Simpson, and you're not going to DFA Morel at this given time. So I think it went on for probably about 20 games extra. I guess if you could put it like it's like, when would you have done it in the perfect scenario? It would have probably been, 15, 20 games ago. But, I'm happy. I'm surprised that they did it, but I'm happy that they did it. I think it's the right move.
All right. I agree with you. All right. We have more to discuss on the Locked On Rays podcast. Well, guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pill that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If those traditional options haven't worked, Rugiet might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. So go ahead, head over to rugiet.com/LockedOnMLB and use code LockedOnMLB to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnMLB and use code LockedOnMLB for 15% off. All right, Jonathan, changing gears here for a moment before we get back to some of the on the field stuff. And I know, with the postcast mainly focusing on what's on the field, but I'm sure you've seen some of the press clippings on the Rays and the possible sales and the people that are interested in the team. As a lifelong Rays fan, is that something that you're looking forward to seeing, is the forthcoming sale? I mean, there's definitely negatives that we can talk about with Stu Sternberg, but he also did bring a winning culture to the franchise and put the people in place to make that happen. But then again, he wasn't spending money like we'd like him to spend money. And then there's the other question mark of if and when the team is sold, are they going to remain in Tampa Bay, or are they going to move to Jacksonville or some other place? So kind of what's your thought process on everything that's going on right now with that?
So I think one thing you said is super important, that Stu deserves a lot of credit. I mean, he bought the team when they lost, 100 games multiple times, and then he rebranded them, and he let really smart people do their thing, and he got out of their way. If you just look at kind of the line of people in the front office that the Rays had, it's no accident that they've had so much success. But things run their course, and obviously, I've been on record saying my frustration with the stadium deal, especially why he backed out of the most recent stadium deal. And I thought, he kind of took advantage of the hurricane. And, even though the hurricane affected, a ton of people across the area, including, my family and my friends as well. But from the person that he was going to sell to, if it goes through, it's always weird with the letter of intent and stuff, now, especially more than ever, until Shovel has broken ground or official deal is signed. I'm always hesitant, but this guy seems like they're not going to move to Jacksonville, right? It seems like they're going to stay in Tampa. That's one of the things that have been reported, and I just think it's time for a fresh voice in terms of getting a stadium deal done. And then when you hear about, when you see he's worked with Jane Castor before, he's the mayor of Tampa, and you see that that people, you're already hearing rumblings that the people in Tampa are willing to work with this guy. It definitely opens up any possibilities for a new stadium being done, more, faster with a new owner. So, but there are different things to kind of say, like, what if this guy steps in and doesn't let Eric Nylander have, full reign like he does now? You know what I mean? Like, so there are still negatives. And I think people get blinded so much by the stadium, which obviously the stadium is the biggest thing. If the Rays leave in 2028, then, we don't really have a team to root for anymore. So obviously that's probably number one. But, there are things underlying that, Stu did a really good job of that you don't know will kind of carry over with new ownership. But in terms of a stadium being done in Tampa Bay, if this happens, I mean, that's just a massive step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think, and Ulysses and I talked about this last week on the program, was nobody in their right mind in government that was going to foot public financing would or should have anything to do with Stu Sternberg after all that went down over the past year, and even some of the issues before that as well, and playing the blame game and so forth. And then with whoever ultimately buys the team, we're just asking for three things actually. One is let the baseball folks run the show. Let Eric Neander and Kevin Cash and everybody, the team around them, do what they continue to do. Two, spend some money via free agency or extending certain players. Like, just think about how much of a difference this franchise could be with a Freddie Freeman in uniform or Marcell Ozuna in uniform or somebody of that ilk. Not saying that you have to go out and sign Shohei Ohtani or Juan Soto, but kind of those mid to upper tier free agents that, you can get for a 4-year, 60, 75, $85 million deal, whatever it may be. And then the other thing is the new stadium. Whether it's on the Tampa side or the St. Petersburg side, somewhere in Tampa Bay and not in North Florida or Orlando or in Nashville or Montreal or something like that. And based on what you said, so I guess this developer might have, some dealings and relationships with Tampa and Jane Castor. Are you kind of thinking that a move to Tampa and not St. Petersburg is within possibility?
Yeah, just, obviously I don't have any connections in anything. It's just what I see on social media with the people that I trust, with who I follow. But, I've been on record. Obviously, I live in St. Pete. I grew up 10 minutes from the Trop. I've been to, hundreds of Rays games. But I'm of the ilk. I don't care if they're in Tampa or St. Pete. I think the people that argue about that are, frankly, I don't know, wasting
They have better things to do.
Yeah. I crossed the bridge and went to a game, and I stayed for 5 innings, and, it was a great experience. It is what it is. But, whatever can kind of get a deal done. So if this guy has, connections with people in Tampa that can help get it done, I'm all for it. And, the people that are reporting that are, some people that have real connections to both sides of it. So I think there's kind of real traction on if this does go through, something materializing rather quickly.
All right. Very good. We have more to discuss next on the Locked On Rays podcast, your team every day. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? Well, with Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning that big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money, it's more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. We all like that, right? So go ahead, take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. All right, Jonathan, wrapping things up on the program today, the Rays begin a 3-game series versus the Kansas City Royals. Tonight, Taj Bradley will be going on the mound. Wanted to get your perspective on him. There's been a lot of hate or vitriol or frustration shoved his way due to some of his recent performances. What is something that you're seeing that is why Taj Bradley's ERA is near 5 and he's just struggling in general?
It's his command. He's one of the most, hot and cold pitchers that I've seen, and we saw it last year. I mean, he was pitcher of the month in the American League one of the months, and people forget June. I believe it was June 1st. He went 7 innings scoreless and had 10 strikeouts, and but his inconsistency is more consistent than his good qualities that come up during his starts, but. Taj Bradley has all the talent in the world. And I think the vote of confidence by the staff or by, the front office, by Kevin Cash, by not sending him down, especially with what Joe Boyle's doing and, leaving him up. And I think hopefully that could bode well for him. But, it's going to be really interesting what he does tonight against the Royals. And because he's been as bad as I've seen him in the last 12 months, in these last 3 starts, and his ERA should be higher because when he blew up against the Mets, when the Rays came back, a lot of those runs were unearned, even though it was Taj's error that led to the guys being on base. But so the number one thing I'm going to look for is, can he stay in the zone? Because there was one at bat to Gary Sanchez in the Orioles game, the last one he started, that was so apparent to me. He got down 3-0 after he let on a leadoff single. So you don't want to walk Gary Sanchez, who's hitting a $180. So he gets back in it with kind of that, courtesy strike. And then you can't walk him. So you have to throw another fastball. Gary Sanchez all over it, and he hits a single, and then things start to spiral. So if you can be in the zone often, and I'd also like to see him use that curveball more. He's been really good with the curveball this season. I think he's only using it like 15% of the time, and he has like almost half his strikeouts on it. So those are kind of the two things I'd be looking at for Taj Bradley.
Yeah, I mean, I know the Rays' history versus the Royals has been a little bit sketchy, but I don't think the Royals are doing that hot this year. So maybe this is an opportunity to get back on a good note versus facing a team like the Mets, who are doing really well this season. Wrapping it up on this one. So I've seen some of the latest reports on All-Star voting. As of what I looked up most recently, Jonathan Aranda is third in All-Star voting at first base. Brandon Lau is fourth at second base. Caminero is sixth at third base, and Yandy Diaz is ninth at DH. The voting to send the top two to the next phase ends at noon on Thursday. So Rays players not getting as much love as we would like. Obviously, the Rays have to have at least one representative. Based on what you said earlier in the episode, is your thought that if the Rays can only have one rep, it would be Jonathan Aranda, or do you think maybe somebody else?
No, it would definitely be Jonathan Aranda. I mean, he's been the best first baseman in the American League this year. And the way that the All-Star game is kind of formatted, I get it, like baseball is a fans game, and it's cool to have them have a say. But when Vladdy has a whole country voting for him, and when, Paul Goldschmidt has the second largest city in America voting, or the first largest city in America voting for him, it's just kind of unfair in the sense that, Jonathan Aranda, who I'm impressed has almost 1 million votes. Like, he's not that far behind. If you look at the numbers, he's 300,000 votes behind, which sounds like a lot. But if you look at some of the other where the other Rays players are in comparison, it's not as drastic. But I think there's a no doubter who should be starting the All-Star game. I mean, he should be starting hitting fourth in the All-Star game. And to take it one step further, like, I think the Rays should have at least 3 All-Stars this year. I think Yandy should be the second DH. I think now that Rafael Devers is gone, he's the best designated hitter in baseball, especially what he's been doing lately. And I think Brandon Lau should be an All-Star with how kind of weak the second base position is. And that's no indictment on Brandon Lau. He's having the best season of his career right now. I mean, if you told me Brandon Lau is going to hit 260, I mean, you take that every day with his power and how consistent he's been over the last about 40 games or so. And then obviously you have the whole conversation with Junior, but third base is a little bit more stacked than some of those other positions. But, another guy like Drew Rasmussen should also be an All-Star, but, he's not going to get the love that some of those other pitchers are. But, if the Rays don't get at least 2 All-Stars, I would be honestly kind of surprised, and I would be pretty disappointed.
Yeah, and I would think that with the amount of guys that say they're injured or are legitimately injured or don't want to participate, that's where some additional opportunities might be for Rays players to get in, and especially with as well as the Rays are playing right now. And if they keep it up to the point of where All-Star voting officially ends, you would think that they would get more than one lone representative. I mean, we're not the White Sox here. We're not the Rockies. We can do a little bit better than that, I think, when we're just a couple games back of the Yankees. So if there's anybody out there that can create some sort of AI program to generate fake email addresses and we can just vote like crazy on the MLB.com page, let's try to make it happen. I do want to, and I think there is a possibility, not saying this will happen, but Junior Caminero may be home run derby participant, where I don't think he necessarily has to be an all-star to participate in the home run derby. So that would be nice to see, assuming that wouldn't mess up his swing and fatigue him in the second half. But Jonathan, if there were, we mentioned a lot of names. We mentioned Rasmussen, we've mentioned Aranda, Yandy, Brandon Lau, so on and so forth. If there were just 2 guys that you could send to the All-Star game, who would it be? I know Aranda is going to be one, but you can only give one more spot to those other guys that we mentioned. Who would you give that to?
I'd go with Brandon Lau because I think he's been, he has been the most consistent he's been in his career. Because you think of, 2019, he hit 40 home runs, and then 2020 is when he finished, top whatever in MVP during the shortened season. So I think more than Junior and more than Yandy, because obviously Junior's on this tear over the last month now, and Yandy's on this tear over the last, kind of 2.5 weeks, where Brandon has been doing it for a little bit longer.
Right.
So it is interesting to your point about Junior being in the home run derby. I don't know. I think you do have to be in the All-Star game, or I don't know if you do have to, but I think they like when
that's what they would prefer. I think, yeah.
So I'm saying that could help him. because he's kind of one of the youngest stars. You see even the little things like MLB posting him more on Instagram. You know what I
Yes.
mean? So hopefully in a backwards way that could help him become an all-star.
Yeah, I got to look it up. I know. So I just Googled it real quickly. And according to the AI overview on Google, yes, it is possible for a player to participate in the home run derby without being selected for the All-Star game. For example, Pete Alonso won the 2021 home run derby despite not being an All-Star. And then recently, Adolis Garcia was a non-all-star participant in the home run derby. So there is some recent precedence for making that happen, but
wow,
we'll see if it does. Jonathan, we appreciate the time as always. We got to have you on more frequently. All three of us, Ulysses, myself, and you, always a fun time. How can people tune into you, find your work? Just plug away, if you will.
So obviously Rays Postcast live after every single game. We'll be live if you watch this before the game tonight or the game tomorrow. It doesn't matter. We'll be live after each of them. So I don't know if it always, I don't go and check before I go live, but normally if you're subscribed, it shows up that you're going live.
Mhm.
But if not, you just click on the channel and you click on live. That's where all the Postcast stuff is. And then you can follow me on Twitter, X at Johnny10 Shields. I tweet a bunch during the game, and all of my more in-game race takes are on there, I would say. So those are kind of the two main ones. Joining live is always super cool. I read the comments at the end of the live. So, we always have a good community that join every show. So, I'd love if more people would come.
Yeah, and you do a great job, and I do subscribe to those alerts. So it's amazing that when I see those notifications, like, man, it's right after the game. I don't know how Jonathan does it. Like, he's on the ball, a legit post-game, legit postcast show. So be sure you check that out. We're the best option. Jonathan's the place to go to and listen to. In the meantime, thank you for making Locked On Rays your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Local analysis brought to you on a national scale. You can find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to those podcasts.